Good evening, Grace Covenant. It's a rainy and kind of chilly late afternoon out here in Fletcher, and I pray that you are well, that you are taking care of yourself as we continue to live in this time of pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the pandemic of racial injustice and the impacts of white supremacy culture that are confronting us every day and have been confronting us for generations in this country. So I pray that you are staying grounded in God's word and God's loving presence and God's spirit, because you need that to be able to engage in the world right now. The world needs you to be strong. The world needs you to be open. And the world needs you to be vulnerable and able to engage in the complexities and challenges of this time. We are coming up on 4 years that I've been here at Grace Covenant. And from the first time I ever preached a sermon here, we've been talking about white supremacy. And I remember that first sermon that I preached on white supremacy. It was after Philando Castile was shot in Minnesota by police in a traffic stop. And I remember a few people coming to me after that sermon, and we were all just getting to know each other. But they asked me, like, why did you use the term white supremacy culture? Why did you use the term white supremacy? That means like the Ku Klux Klan, or that means, that term doesn't apply to us here at Grace Covenant. And we began work that summer with 16 for 16, just talking about what is white supremacy culture, and really trying to work on letting our defenses down as white people, as white identified people, and as a largely white faith community, to just let our defenses come down and realize that it's not an accusation, it is a description. And that it is a description that needs to penetrate us as white identified people and as a white dominant community, so much so that we begin to understand and reframe that racism isn't something that people of color need to explain to white people. It's actually something that white people created and continue to maintain with the way we live. So white identified people are actually some of the most racialized people in the world, because we're so racialized that we can't even see that. That's how racialized we are, that it's invisible to us, that things seem normal to us, that we have developed a very high tolerance for being estranged, being in broken relationships, and tolerating violence of all kinds of bodies, but especially black and brown bodies. So that's the work we've been doing, to try to understand that we don't need to sit and wait for people of color to explain racism to us. We need to wake up to the fact that we are carriers of the most harmful forms of racism, and that is this kind of deeply internalized white supremacy culture. And we've talked in a lot of different ways about the way that manifests in white culture, with things like a sense of urgency or perfectionism or either or thinking or paternalism, or only one right way, or I'm the only one that can do it right, or all sorts of things. We've talked about Tima Okun's views of white supremacy culture, and we kind of circle back through some similar struggles as we discuss, as we work, as we struggle, as we go into and out of active postures of solidarity, or taking action in our community by going to city council meetings, or engaging in kind of difficult encounters in which we feel ourselves learning and growing and being uncomfortable. So I've been thinking a lot about, what it is that keeps white identified people in this work. And I think the question has flipped for me, and it's become more like a question of, why do human beings, especially white identified human beings, so deeply resent and resist this work? Why did we have to get to this place for so many white people to even realize that this is going on? And it really set in for me that there's just this very tenacious framing that's been placed in our bodies, in our psyches, around who we are in the world. And at the core of that is a deep kind of self-loathing that's constantly telling us we're not good enough. And it's this strange combination when you're kind of formed in white supremacy culture, that you're constantly feeling not good enough, and you're constantly being told that you're superior. So there's this weird dissonance that we walk around with that that creates a lot of shame and guilt and self-loathing. And that can manifest in a lot of ways. It can manifest in kind of an extremely narcissistic personality, like we see in the current White House, or it can manifest in this deeply kind of self-deprecating, almost martyr-like attitude of, I don't need anything, let me just help everybody else until I've completely depleted myself. And a lot of white people are somewhere on that continuum between the martyr and the narcissist. And I really feel like God is calling us into this middle way, this more balanced way in which white identified people can actually learn what it means to love ourselves and love the world and love our neighbors with a freedom that's not so burdened by this self-loathing and this kind of message of superiority that the culture has given us. And it brings me back again and again to the song that I love, the hymn that I love, that we sing at Grace Covenant. For everyone born, there's a place at the table. And that, the chorus, the refrain is, and God will delight when we're creators of justice and joy and compassion and peace. And God will delight when we're creators of justice and joy. And I love that song because it brings together justice and joy. And I feel like white identified people, including some folks at Grace Covenant right now, are feeling so troubled, almost despairing about what we're seeing in the world. While there is a way to see this uprising, this movement that is gathering steam like it never has in our society, with a lot of joy. God is doing something. Something new is happening. And the more that white identified people can give ourselves to this movement, not to be in charge of it, not to sit and scrutinize it and say if they're doing it right or not, but to completely give ourselves to this beautiful kind of transformation that is happening, and lay down the the sickness that white supremacy culture has put in our bodies. Like we could actually be free of that anxiety, that judgment, that perfectionism, all of those things that make our bodies tight and sore and closed and sick. If we could actually let go of all of that toxic stuff in a way that would actually create healed relationships with everything around us, with our black and brown siblings, with the earth, with ourselves, with God, with our families. Can we actually start to see that with true justice comes true joy? Just really, if we could just let that sink in and trust how God is moving in such mighty ways right now. It's overwhelming to see and feel the movement. I don't know if you can hear the rain just coming down. God is working. God is washing. God is filling. God is saturating. God is watering all of us for the growing of this time. And so, Grace Covenant, my invitation to you tonight is to take a deep breath and just look around at the hardest things there are for you to look at. And open your eyes to the way God is there and showing up and looking back at you and saying, come, this is your work. This is who I'm calling you to be. This is the promise of justice and joy. If we can live into that Grace Covenant, then we're truly glimpsing God's face. And it's what God's been preparing us for. I believe that with every fiber of my being. It's why I'm here. It's why you're here. It's why we're here. And it's why we can trust that God is here.